Hello and welcome to a very special YouTube-only edition of the In the Money Players podcast. We did a show like this at the Breeders' Cup. It was one of the most popular shows we ever did. I take no credit. I just, text the right people, and then we get the great content. First, I'm going to introduce a man who's been on our airwaves many, many times. He is known to you from his work on NBC Sports, his work with the NFL, his work with the Buyer Speed Figure team. He is Randy Moss. Randy, how are things?
Pete, doing well. I'm surrounded, as I know Jerry is as well, surrounded by papers, past performances, papers, undercard stuff. We're hard at work.
We're going to start to unpack some of that stuff that you are in the midst of. And you tipped our hand already here about our next guest. I mean, very simply put, he's a Hall of Famer. He is probably the best jockey I ever saw. He's a hell of an analyst too, and a great fan of racing. Jerry Bailey, welcome to the In the Money Airways.
Nice to join you guys.
So let's start off with the big dance. I think it's worth diving right in, and I want to zoom out before we zoom in and look at this group of 3-year-olds from a high-level perspective, just to get some thoughts on this crop in general. And Jerry, we'll start with you. What do you think of this crop of 3-year-olds as a unit?
Okay, so we're asked this question every year, and I don't think, short of a huge standout in a particular year, I don't think we ever really know how good the crop is until we get later on in the year and see how they end up doing, especially against older horses, maybe later in the fall. But I will tell you one thing, that they are very competitive and they are very evenly matched, at least the top 5 or 6, in my opinion.
We'll get into some of that maybe.
Yeah, Pete, to me, it looks like on paper right now compared to what we see in a typical year at this time, it's about average. That's not to say that someone in the Derby, may not step up and run a huge race, or a couple to suddenly lift this race above average. But it's solid. I wouldn't call it a weak Derby field by any stretch.
I think that term competitive is going to keep coming up and up. And it's really an interesting year when you do have the one horse Forte at the top of the market who has this amazing resume. You take the speed figures away and you just look at the form. And I feel like there are years where this horse could be a dominant favorite. If there's one horse in this crop who's a Triple Crown contender, potentially, Randy, would you suggest that would be Forte as compared to his peers at this point? Or is there another horse you've seen the kind of talent that they might not just take down the roses, but might be making a bid for history at Belmont in 6 weeks' time?
Well, if you're asking me if I consider Forte to be the best shot at sweeping the Triple Crown, then you're asking me if I think Forte has the best shot to win the first leg of the Triple Crown, and I'm not so sure. So, I wouldn't necessarily go that far. There are several horses in here with a big effort in the Derby, who could conceivably go on in that regard, because as we've all seen, and it's unfortunate because of the 2-week gap, but, the Preakness is almost becoming a base on balls in some respects for a horse that wins the Kentucky Derby very impressively, because the competition level takes a nosedive. We'll see what happens, but it's a solid bunch. I wouldn't anticipate a Triple Crown winner to come out of this, but there's some nice horses.
What do you think, Jerry? Can a field that looks this open now potentially narrow to the point where you'd be surprised if we were looking at somebody making a run for all 3 this time around?
Yeah, I would be surprised if we had a Triple Crown. Look, there's a horse in here to me that is just tailor-made for the Belmont. His name's Tapit Trice. The reason I skipped the Derby and the Preakness is because he has no his mid-race acceleration is below average. He's a really talented horse. He's a little quirky, but he's just like a grinder, perfect for the Belmont. But I'm not so sure if he drew inside the Kentucky Derby, if he could navigate through the traffic and get up in time, because he usually has to go around horses to avoid being stuck in traffic because he has no acceleration, in full flight. So that's a horse that I think could win the Belmont, but he would have a tough time winning the first 2.
So Pete, let me add a but to your Triple Crown conversation here. If you had asked us in '97 with Silver Charm, who wasn't the favorite in the Derby, 98, Real Quiet, who wasn't the favorite in the Derby. 99, Charismatic, who was a long shot in the Derby. 02, War Emblem, who was a long shot in the Derby. You know, all of those horses went to Baltimore with a chance to sweep the Triple Crown. And Jerry or I or no one else would have expected that there would be the possibility of a Triple Crown going in. So sometimes you never know.
And you made the key point, I think, about this really, Randy, in terms of it's a complete exaggeration to say it's a penalty kick, the Preakness for the Derby winner, but it's no exaggeration to say that horse goes there with a strong hand and a far winnowed down field. So at that point, anything can happen. And to Jerry's point about a runner like Tapit Trice, would have to agree on the way he shapes in his races, on his bloodlines. You know, I mean, the belt, that just sort of, we have a new bet this year. We have a Preakness future wager. I'm actually wearing my shirt in honor of that, but we don't have a Belmont one. But if we did, I wouldn't be surprised if your man Tapit Trice went as the favorite. I want to talk about the pace scenario in this year's Derby, because I keep going back and forth. When I first looked at this group, I characterized it as, well, I'm not so sure if we really have a lot of speed horses this time around. And then the more I think about tactics and the more I look at pace figures, I could argue it the other way as well, where since there's no super obvious front runner, maybe outside of a Derma Sotogake, and even he's rated in his races, maybe a bunch of riders are going to get ideas in their head about going to the lead, and maybe it could boil over again. Jerry, I'd love you to make your best guess at what type of pace picture we're going to see in this year's Derby. Apologies for the tough question.
No, it's not a tough question at all, Randy. And I talk about this all the time. This is my wheelhouse when I rode. I don't see a lot of pace in here. I emailed Randy or texted him 3 weeks ago. I said, there's not much pace in this Derby, which gives a horse like Verifying, who's got real tactical speed, used a little bit of it in the Bluegrass and wasn't able to hold off Tapit Trice. That's the kind of horse that could sit close, sit handy, be on the lead even, and get away from the field, you know, at the 3/16 pole. And if Tapit Trice or Forte get jammed up in traffic, they might not be able to catch him. You know, that's the advantage of having speed, tactical speed in a paceless race, is you can get away from the field. I wouldn't say at the top of the stretch, but at the 3/16 pole. And if other contenders get caught up in traffic, there's your advantage. You don't need much of an advantage if you're a contender anyway. But I think it's going to be, answer to your question, I think it's going to be an honest pace, but by no means it's going to be really fast.
Yeah. And the Derby gods giveth and the Derby gods taketh away, Pete, because we had obviously the dropout of Blazing Sevens and Jace's Road comes in the field, which adds a little bit of speed. And then you have Wild on Ice dropping out, which to my eyes was one of the more likely pace horses. I didn't think he had any chance to win, but coming off of that extremely fast-paced Sunderland Park Derby, you know, I expected Wild on Ice to be at least a serious pace factor, and now he's out. So you don't have any real confirmed one-dimensional speed horses. Even Derma Sotogake, who won the UAE Derby, that's the only time in his life he's ever gone to the early lead, and that might have been primarily because he had the rail draw at Maidan. But he ran so well in that race on the lead that I would expect that they're going to maybe try to go for the lead again, especially if you go back a year ago and you see how Christophe Lemaire rode in the Kentucky Derby on the other Japanese horse, Crown Pride. He thought he was in the All-American Futurity. I mean, that he and the other Barcelona, the other foreign rider who aren't accustomed to riding on U.S. dirt, on the Summer Is Tomorrow, left the starting gate last year like it was a quarter-mile race. So I would anticipate Lemaire to at least be aggressive again in the early part, and I think that's what I would like to see if I'm a Derma Sotogake guy.
You know, a lot does depend on post positions. If you take the horses that you think may be pace factors, Derma Sotogake, Verifying, those type of horses, if they draw inside, inside the 6, it kind of forces their hand. They have to use their speed to hold their position. I think that's what will make a more honest pace.
I had a follow-up about Lemaire for Bailey. How much do you think it helps Lemaire? Absolute world-class rider. Someone put him up there as the best rider in the world. How much does it help him, do you think, Jerry, having that experience on Crown Pride? And do you think there's any chance we might see an overcorrection from him? I'd hate to see him not using Derma Sotogake's speed at all after the speed duel. What do you think will be in his head as far as tactics when the gates are about to pop?
I have no idea. I don't know the guy personally, and I don't watch him every day. The biggest mistake that foreign riders have when they come here is overdoing we have to be close. It's a speed type, racing over in America. Look, it depends on where he draws. He knows the horse can lead and do well. He draws inside. I think he'll use him somewhat, but I don't think he'll overcorrect on this particular horse. I think he knows, even though he can be tactical and doesn't even close to have to be, that he can do it if he needs to.
I think that Derma Sotogake is certainly one of the most interesting stories and interesting horses coming in to this year's Kentucky Derby. The Japanese contingent, certainly more interesting to me anyway than any of the other groups of horses they sent over. But Randy, can they get over the hump? I mean, is this still a bridge too far, do you think, for these horses for whom, in a nation that for all their dominance is so much more known for turf than dirt? Is this something realistic that you could see coming to fruition under the Twin Spires, a Japanese winner?
Well, I mean, given the fact that, in my eyes at least, Pete, his prep in the UAE Derby was the fastest and the most visually impressive of any of these horses, obviously American horses included, then yeah, I would think that the horse has an excellent chance. I don't want to overthink it too much, right? Yes, the UAE Derby horses, as Jerry will tell you, have an 0 for 18 record in the Derby. But you can't, in my opinion, you have to be more flexible than that. You can't be locked in to the statistic unless you go back and you look at the individual horses in the individual races. I would tell you, in my opinion, that there are only 2 years in which the UAE Derby winner was even really close to 1.25 miles Kentucky Derby quality. One of those years was in 2001. I think Jerry rode in that UAE Derby, and it was Express Tour who defeated Street Cry in a photo finish. Then it was 6 lengths back to Lido Palace in third. Both those horses came to the Kentucky Derby. Express Tour had a bruised foot and missed training. Street Cry got injured a week out and couldn't make the race. Street Cry, I think, would have had a legitimate chance to win, although Monarchos ran so fast, you certainly can't say that he would have. Then there's Mendelssohn. Okay, Mendelssohn wins by 18 in the UAE Derby, but he had never had dirt in his face. He was ridden hard by Ryan Moore I don't remember if it was Ryan Moore or not. I don't pay that much attention to jockeys, but it was. Mendelssohn won, wire to wire in the UAE Derby, had never had dirt kicked in his face, and suddenly found himself in Louisville in a field completely laden with early speed. It was going to be a fast pace. He was going to get dirt kicked in his face. And not only that, the track was wet. He was going to get wet dirt kicked in his face, right? So I thought he had no chance in that scenario, having never experienced that before. That's it. Nobody else that comes from UAE has ever had any chance in this race on paper. Now, this horse does, and I'm not going to hold those other failures against it.
I think of the body check also that Mendelssohn took out of the gate. Yeah. That was the old auxiliary starting gate. And then, I might nominate Thunder Snow as another horse who had credentials, and whatever happened there, the bucking bronco routine, his race was over in the first few yards. But Jerry, let's bring you in on this key question. Does you bringing up the 0 for 18 stat, does that mean you're not buying this Japanese narrative that Randy and I are peddling?
No. Look, I respect Randy enough to believe his numbers. He goes by numbers. He's excellent at it, and I guess I would give him a chance. Here's the thing that Christophe Lemaire needs to know, and if he's watching this show, great.
Hi, Christophe.
Tell him, Jerry. Tell him.
You need to hustle your horse. I don't care where you come from in the race, unless it's Silky Sullivan. You need to hustle your horse the first 3 or 4 jumps out of the gate, because you can want to be laying 5th or 6th, but if you get squeezed, you could be 12th in 2 strides just as easy. But after you gain your position, the first 50 yards, then you don't have to go over the top with keeping your horse on the pace. Then you can allow him to ease back a little bit. And that's the nuance that these foreign riders have to understand. Yes, it's a speed track. Yes, it's a speed race. Get your position, but then don't make I'm not going to use
I knew what you were going to say there, Jerry.
Don't just barbecue your horse early in the race. Give him a chance after you've gotten some tactical position.
It's fantastic stuff. We might have to pull that out as a clip, send it on Twitter, and tag Lemaire. That's my idea for that. Now, Randy, you talked about how fast the UAE Derby was. Are you referring to the clock, or did you make a figure for that race?
We don't do official buyer speed figures, obviously, for the Dubai races. And in this case, it's really more of an estimate but you can look at and use Country Grammar as sort of a benchmark. And I'm not talking about Country Grammar in Dubai, where he really didn't run at all, but Country Grammar in Saudi Arabia, where he seemed to run his normal race against some of the Japanese horses who then came back and ran in the Dubai World Cup after that. Okay. So you get a pretty good line on some of those Japanese horses based on Country Grammar. Then you take how fast the Dubai World Cup was. Okay, and you compare that with the UAE Derby, which is very easy to do in any given year. They're only a 1/16 of a mile apart in distance. There's no run-up distance to the timing. It's very, very straightforward. And the UAE Derby this year was run in real rarity. 5 buyer speed figure points faster than the Dubai World Cup. Now, normally the Dubai World Cup's run anywhere from 108, 105 to 110. Or so. This year, based on the Saudi Cup, it looked like it was a little lower, maybe like 101, 102. You're still talking about a 106, 107 estimated speed figure for Derma Sotogake in the UAE Derby. And obviously that tops the list of any of the Kentucky Derby contenders so far. It's an estimate, but it's a pretty good ballpark.
It's very interesting. And we've had our Dubai expert, Michael Adolphson, on talking about how the track does slow somewhat when the sun goes down, et cetera, et cetera. But that's racehorse time by any definition, and a horse who clearly has to be taken seriously by figure thinking people such as us. I'm not going to really hold your feet to the fire because we don't have the draw, which obviously is needed. But I do want to talk to you guys about we'll just call it the Derby short list for now. But before we get to that, I would like to know where we can watch the Derby on NBC, NBC's multiple Eclipse Award winning coverage, I should add. Always something. I'm at the Derby usually, but I'll tape it and come back and watch it. There's always amazing insights. I want to know exactly when you're going to be on. And I understand, Randy, that you're not the one I should be asking because you have no clue. So, Jerry, when's the NBC coverage going to be for Oaks and Derby?
The source, though, first. I'm going by an email from our producer.
I mean, it should be good.
I know the Oaks is on NBC. I think NBC for 1 hour, starting at 5 to 6.
Okay.
The previous airing will be, I believe, on CNBC.
Okay.
Starting at 1 to 5.
Great. So full coverage. You guys will be keeping busy on Friday. And what picks up on Saturday?
Saturday we begin at 1 o'clock. No, I'm sorry. We begin at 12.
Okay.
And we go until 7 o'clock p.m.
Great. And that's all on the big network?
The final 4 hours, I believe, are on NBC.
Excellent. Check local listings, all that stuff, but just want to get people thinking about watching this coverage. Let's talk Derby shortlist and then get into maybe a little chatter on the undercard, and we'll close off with a couple quick thoughts about the Oaks. Don't want to take all day from you guys, but Randy, what are you thinking right now in terms of a Derby shortlist, or if you had to, if we had anti-post betting here, where would you be leaning from this far out?
Derby short list before we see post positions would be, we've talked about him, Derma Sotogake. Be Forte just based on his consistency, although I think he's extremely beatable in here and probably a good bet against. Angel of Empire because of how visually impressive he was. Verifying because I think he's going to get the right trip. And I think that would be my short list.
All right, that sounds like
a practical move.
Okay.
Absolutely perfect trips. And I'm going to try to beat Tapit Trice for the reasons that Jerry pointed out. His lack of mid-race acceleration that could be a problem in a big field.
Jerry, how about you? What are you, again, knowing the draw means everything to the way you do your analysis. Who are some of the horses you want to see drawn well?
Listen, I think Forte can handle almost any draw. I mean, he proved in the Florida Derby by breaking from post 11 that he can do a lot of things. He's tactical. Practical move, has enough early tactical speed. He can put himself anywhere. Tapit Trice, I think, is, to me, the most improving horse coming into the race, even though I do believe he's a little handicapped by his lack of inter-race acceleration. If he draws inside the 6th, he's got a mountain of work to do. Because I don't believe he likes being inside horses. They make a conscious effort to get him out in the clear as soon as possible in all of his races. So he would have the most to overcome. Whereas if he drew 10, 11, 12 on out, I think he would have a lot less problems. And his running style might not be such a hindrance. Angel of Empire, I don't think it matters. He works his way through the pack pretty well. I would agree with Randy and verifying. He's got the tactical speed to give him a good position anywhere he draws. Since Randy likes the Japanese horse, and I'm not against him, I think if he draws inside, he goes. And I think he's going to get a little bit of pressure from at least verifying early in the race, which I'm not sure if it's good or bad for him. I don't know that he can reproduce the UAE Derby effort. I really don't. But we'll find out if he's the goods or not. Kings Barnes, I don't think he's fast enough. He's undefeated. Certainly nothing wrong with him, but he hasn't proven to me that he's fast enough to beat the 2 or 3 best in here. That's about it. Throw the rest of them in a basket, and whoever gets the best grip will probably run well.
Trainer comments suggest that Brad Cox feels like, I mean, this is reading between the lines. He didn't come out and say this, but it feels like he wants verifying to try to sit forwardly. That might tell us tactics about some of his other runners, or it might just be a trainer comment that I'm misinterpreting. But it is interesting for that. Derma Sotogake draws inside and maybe does prove dominant speed on the lead. I want to give you each a chance to just name check one long shot, just because we had this crazy chaotic result last year. And I think a lot of people watching this on YouTube are going to be thinking, hey, an 80 to 1 shot won it last year. Who might be the 80 to 1 shot this year? Your short list, I mean, verifying is going to probably be a very solid price. But is there anything just wild that wouldn't surprise you in that box of horses?
We're not giving you 80 to 1. Come on. Take 25 to 1. Or
25, okay. I will accept being produced by Jerry Bailey, absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to pick one horse, and I don't know if he's going to be 25 to 1. He might be. Mage. And if, to me, he was ridden, his move was premature in the Florida Derby. I think ridden correctly, the move timed better, that he could have won that race. That doesn't mean he's going to win the Kentucky Derby, but I think a well-timed move with Mage gives him a chance at a big price.
Love that call, Randy.
And that's one of the talking points against Forte, by the way. Yes, he deserves a lot of credit for overcoming the post position and winning the Florida Derby. Only the 2 horses that have won the Florida Derby from post 10 and out on this particular racetrack were Big Brown and Barbaro, right? Yep. And they both went on to win the Kentucky Derby. But because Mage's move was so early, if you look at the internal fractions, he fell apart the last 1/8 of a mile. So maybe Forte's surge at the end had just as much to do with Forte getting the wobbles than it did any sort of, ballyhooed, I know where the finish line is, determination by Forte. My long shot at 25 to 1 or so would be 2 fills. Big race in the Jeff Ruby. More than likely, looking at pedigree and looking at his past performances, the result of the synthetic racing surface that he was running on. But we don't know that for a fact. It may also be just the result of 3-year-old improvement. And if it turns out to be the latter and not the synthetic surface at Turfway, then I don't see any reason why 2 fills couldn't duplicate that effort at a big price.
Another very intriguing idea. Undercard wise, we got so many stories. We're not going to be really picking horses from these races this far out, but I'd love to know a storyline or 2 you each are looking forward to in terms of the undercard. I know, Randy, you were saying off air you think it's a particularly strong undercard this time.
It's great. Jerry, go ahead. Who's your storyline?
No, I mean, I would be stealing this from you, but it's Cody's Wish for me. The best storyline at the Breeders' Cup last year, makes his return first start of the year. So yeah, that would be it for me. That's low hanging fruit. because he's the storyline guy.
But it's right. And, you know, folks, if you haven't seen that award-winning NBC Sports piece on Cody's Wish, pause us, go watch that now, and then come back. Have the tissues handy. It's amazing stuff. What else, Randy, on this undercard?
So look, here's what you got to look forward to. I'm just going to skip through these, right? First of all, the Pat Day Mile is probably going to have a field of 14. It is just a really good, solid, evenly matched race that everybody wants to run in, right? You're going to have the Twin Spires Turf Sprint is okay because Caravel is running on.
Caravel's in there, right? Yeah.
Right on Sydney. A Churchill Turf Mile Spinderella, that sensational mare filly trained by Graham Motion, is making her comeback in the race. You got Cody's Wish in the Churchill Downs. You got Goodnight Olive in the Derby City Distaff against Wicked Halo and maybe Frank's Rocket. We'll see if she runs opening day or if she scratches. You've got Up to the Mark, real up and coming horse trained by Todd Pletcher in the 1.8 mile race right before the Derby. I mentioned Caravel on Friday. Oh, I didn't mention the American Turf. That might be one of the best races of the weekend. Holy cow. Jerry and I have been looking at that race, and there are like 6 or 7 3-year-olds in there on the turf that are really legitimate. Friday, the best 2 older horses in the country right now, arguably, West Willpower and Art Collector against Rich Strike. They square off again. La Troyenne, right? You've got Secret Oath coming back again, apparently, for Wayne Lucas in the 8 Bells. How good is Money's Gold? Right? Trained by Todd Pletcher. I mean, all these horses are running in the undercard on Friday and Saturday, and it's just going to be just a sensational 2 days of racing.
A star-studded lineup. You can catch it all on NBC Sports with Jerry and Randy. Can't get out of here without talking about the Oaks, and I know I'm giving it short shrift, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. Very curious to know. This is a group that has not been super strong in terms of speed figures, certainly. Do you think somebody might step up in that regard come Oaks Friday, Randy?
It's entirely possible. I agree with you that it doesn't look that illustrious on paper, for sure. But I think Jerry and I have got to narrow down to 3 horses, really. Wet Paint, South Lawn, and Botanical. I could see any of the 3 winning. They're both in excellent form. They're both, they've both been dominant. Well, all 3 of them have been dominant in their most recent wins. So I think the winner of the Oaks is likely to be one of those 3.
Brad Cox holds a strong hand. That much we can all agree on. Jerry, is there one of those 3 who stand out to you in the Oaks, or another runner you're looking forward to seeing compete?
Well, I mean, Wet Paint's the most consistent. South Lawn's the most improving to me. And Botanical, Randy liked for a long shot 2 fills in the Derby. Botanical would be this kind of the same type of filly in the Oaks. She's come off an impressive victory at Turfway Park. She's never run on the dirt, but if she's that good on the dirt as she was at Turfway on the synthetic, she's got a chance.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I'll self-aggrandize here before we get out of here. This arrived in the mail the other day after a year or so detour over in England. I do not have as many of these as either of you gentlemen, but I did want to say thank you to you both, because most certainly wouldn't have gotten it without your help on that Breeders' Cup piece we worked on a couple of years ago, Randy, with your great recollections of Arazi, and Jerry, you telling us all about Cigar, of course, and Arkong as well. We had a little bonus coverage, but welcoming this to the bunker and saying thank you both for all your help, not just today, but over these last few years. It is always a pleasure. I look forward to watching your fantastic coverage.
Are you going to be there? Are you going to be at Churchill Downs?
Of course I am. Of course I am. Yeah.
All right. Well, look us up.
I'll come by and harass you a little bit more after we get the post draw. We can hold your feet to the fire for some final answers at that point.
Okay.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Guys, cheers.